Welcome to Sleep Relax. Tonight, I will take you on a long journey back in time to a world that was often harsh, sometimes hopeless, but also full of resilience. This is the story of medieval peasants, the ordinary men and women who lived their entire lives under the shadow of famine, plague, and feudal lords. As you listen, allow yourself to imagine the sights, the sounds, and even the smells of a world long gone, a world where survival itself was the greatest achievement. Picture a small village, somewhere in the rolling countryside of medieval Europe. The land stretches wide, dotted with patches of wheat and barley, and fields worked by tired hands. At the center of this village stands a cluster of cottages, simple homes built from wood, mud, and straw. Smoke rises from crooked chimneys, curling upward into the pale sky. Chickens wander freely across the muddy lanes. A few children, barefoot and dressed in rough wool, run past, laughing for the moment, though hunger will often cut their joy short. This is the world of the peasant, a world defined by labor, by the soil, and by the seasons. From dawn until dusk, life was a cycle of work. The peasant's day began with the first light of morning, sometimes even before the sun rose. The rooster's cry was not just a sound of nature, but a signal that the long day was beginning. A family might gather quickly for a meal of coarse bread, perhaps dipped in thin broth if wheat and barley were their lifeline. These grains were the core of the peasant diet, baked into dark, heavy bread. But not all of what was grown could be eaten. A large portion went to the lord of the manor, who demanded rent for the land. Another portion was taken by the church as tithes owed to God. Whatever remained was divided among the family, carefully rationed to last through the months until the next harvest. In years of plenty, there was enough to fill stomachs. In years of poor harvests, hunger haunted the village like a shadow. Hunger was a constant fear. When famine struck, the people suffered deeply. Grain became scarce, its price rising beyond reach. Bread, once the comfort of daily life, turned into a luxury. In desperation, peasants turned to substitutes. They ground husks, weeds, and even bark into their bread, creating loaves that were bitter and coarse. Roots dug from the earth, leaves plucked from hedges, anything to fill the belly was tried. Parents often gave the last scraps of food to their children, choosing to go hungry themselves. And for peasants, the Black Death was a nightmare. Yet in its aftermath, life changed in unexpected ways. So many had died that labor became scarce. Lords, desperate for workers, had no choice but to offer better wages. For the first time, some peasants gained power to negotiate. A man who once labored endlessly for little reward might now leave his village, offering his work to a lord who paid more. Others fled to towns, where freedom could sometimes be claimed after a year and a day of residence. Though the plague brought unimaginable suffering, it also opened small windows of opportunity. But still, the feudal system held most in its grip. The lord's authority was heavy. He demanded not only crops, but also days of labor, where peasants had to leave their own fields and work on his. They repaired roads, built fences, harvested the lord's grain, and served in his household when called. In return, they were given protection, or at least the promise of it. Yet protection was never certain. When war broke out between lords, villages were trampled underfoot. Armies plundered fields, stole livestock, and left nothing behind but ashes. For peasants, the wars of the powerful brought nothing but ruin. Even in times of peace, life was full of hardship. Homes were small and crowded, one or two rooms at most. The walls were made of wattle and daub, woven branches smeared with mud, and the roofs thatched with straw. Smoke from the hearth filled the air, for chimneys were rare. The floor was packed earth, swept clean but never free of dust. Families and animals often shared the same space for warmth and protection. At night, parents and children huddled together on straw mats, wrapped in woolen blankets, listening to the crackle of the fire as the wind howled outside. Yet in the midst of such hardship, there were moments of joy. Festivals broke the monotony of daily life. After the harvest, villagers gathered to celebrate, singing songs, dancing, and drinking ale brewed from barley. The church marked holy days with feasts, and even the poorest joined in when food was shared. Marriages, baptisms, and local fairs brought laughter and color to lives otherwise gray with labor. Music echoed through the village, and for a moment, hunger and toil were forgotten. Children found happiness in small things: a carved wooden toy, a game of chasing one another through the fields, or simply watching the animals graze. Women gathered to spin wool and tell stories. Men sang while working in the fields, their voices rising together in rough harmony. These were the fragile threads that held life together, giving peasants strength to endure. The church was ever present. It promised salvation but demanded obedience. Priests collected tithes, reminded peasants of sin, and offered blessings. For many, faith was the only comfort. Death was constant, but heaven offered hope. The toll of bells marked births, deaths, and holy days, echoing through the village and binding lives to the rhythm of the church. And so the cycle repeated year after year. Planting in spring, labor through summer, harvest in autumn, and hunger in winter. Plague, famine, and war came like storms, but the peasants endured. Their world was narrow, bounded by the land, but within it, they lived with courage and resilience. As you picture this world, let your thoughts drift with it. Imagine walking through the village at dusk. The sun sinks behind the fields, casting long shadows. Smoke rises from the cottages, and the air smells of stew and wood smoke. A child laughs in the distance. An ox bellows as it is led into the barn. The sound of voices drifts from a cottage, where a family gathers for their meager meal. Life is hard, but it goes on as it always has. And so, slowly, gently, the story of the medieval peasant becomes a story of endurance. Through famine and plague, through toil and sorrow, they survived. Their lives were not filled with greatness or glory, but with quiet strength. Tonight, as you listen, let their world carry you into rest. Their story is long, steady, and unbroken, like the endless turning of the seasons. Close your eyes and drift with